When God sees you doing what you can, believing when there's no sign, thanking Him when you're weak.
When you are going through difficult times, you often end up seeing what your faith is made of, and this is when you have the opportunity to grow. You know, when all of that criticism came in, we actually did the same thing, and I knew that we were acting in the appropriate manner. A rift in the family that has been simmering beneath the surface for years has just been brought to light by Joel Osteen, which is a shocking turn of events. Joel Osteen, who is known for his public persona as a calm and uplifting figure, has shocked the world by revealing the explosive tensions that he has with Joni Lamb, his mother-in-law. Their ministry gave the impression of being united for many years, but it is now abundantly clear that there have been significant problems that have not been resolved. Despite the fact that this is not the first time that the Osteen family has been confronted with drama behind the scenes, Joel is becoming increasingly vocal about his feelings. How did the man who is known for his optimistic outlook come to make such a public declaration? Joel has always been held in high esteem by the general public due to his leadership and the accomplishments of his ministry. However, the revelation of the truth regarding his relationship with Joni has caused many people to question everything. The shocking revelations made by Joel come at a time when the general public was already aware of the turmoil that was occurring within the Lamb family. Over the course of several months, the power struggles, manipulation, and allegations of spiritual abuse have been discussed in a low-key manner. However, it appears that everything is now readily available to the public. What was it that prompted Joel to take such a risk? Is it possible that the years of problems that have not been resolved are finally taking their toll? What exactly took place during that encounter between Joel and Joni that brought him to the verge of breaking down? A family that is well known for their cohesiveness and faith is currently being torn apart by the very forces that were responsible for bringing them together in the first place. How does this impact the future of Lakewood Church? And what does it mean? There was a significant amount of tension in the air during that meeting, and it is evident that feelings were running high. Joel's decision to speak out was not solely motivated by his own personal grievances. Rather, it was motivated by the impact that these family struggles are having on their ministry and the people that they serve. The Osteen family, after all, is responsible for the establishment of one of the most extensive ministries in the world, which has millions of adherents. Not only is this feud a matter of personal contention, but it is also a public spectacle that poses a risk of destroying the foundation that they have labored so diligently to construct. Given this information, what does it imply for their future in the ministry? To what extent do these shocking revelations indicate that the Osteen family's hold on power is beginning to weaken? The decision that Joel has made to finally break his silence comes at a time when the general public is more than eager to learn the truth. When it comes to the realm of megachurches, the Osteen family has frequently been regarded as an unbreakable and nearly unbeatable force. However, the cracks are starting to show now, and the entire world is keeping a close eye on the situation. The way in which power struggles and the dynamics of families can influence the path that a massive organization like Lakewood Church takes is something that the general public finds fascinating. Following Joel's disclosure of the tension that exists between himself and Joni, many people are curious about what will take place next. Is it possible for the family to mend their broken relationships, or will this be the final straw that causes everything to fall apart? These shocking statements made by Joel have left the entire world in a state of disbelief, and the fallout is just getting started. A story of betrayal, power, and control that could have far-reaching consequences is being told here. This is not just a personal family matter, it is a story that involves all three. The fact that Joni Lamb is at the center of the controversy has caused many people to question the authority that she possesses and the impact that it has on those who are closest to her. There is one thing that is distinct as the dust settles. This will not be the end of the story. Do you believe in spiritual manipulation or spiritual authority? As soon as Jonathan and Susie Lamb broke their silence regarding their interactions with Joni Lamb, the reaction they received was nothing short of breathtaking. They disclosed that for a considerable amount of time, they had been subjected to the influence of spiritual manipulation, with Joni utilizing her level of authority to exert control over their actions. In a gathering that took place in July 2023, Jimmy Evans informed Jonathan and Susie that they were required to submit to Joni because her voice was the voice of God. This was the reason for their submission. After hearing this claim, many people began to question the legitimacy of Joni's leadership, which caused shockwaves to travel throughout the religious community. Did this guidance come from a spiritual perspective, Or was it manipulation that was disguised as divine authority? Jonathan gave a response that was both prompt and illuminating. For some reason, he couldn't understand why he was required to listen to Joni's voice rather than hearing directly from God himself. It was not only the dynamics of the family that he was concerned about. He was also concerned about the function of spiritual authority within the ministry. This is not the first time that Jonathan and Susie have experienced this kind of pressure. However, this was the first time that they had made their allegations public. The allegations that they have made regarding spiritual abuse and manipulation paint a disturbing picture of the ways in which power can be exercised within religious establishments. What percentage of this, however, is a matter that pertains to the family, and what percentage is rooted in the larger issues of leadership that exist within the ministry? During the course of the meeting, it became abundantly clear that Joni's control over her family went extremely far beyond merely providing them with direction. The goal was to ensure complete compliance with the regulations. Jonathan's annoyance was palpable as he came to the realization that he had been forced to agree with decisions that were not in accordance with his beliefs. The manipulation was not limited to making decisions for the ministry. Rather, it was aimed at controlling the lives and decisions of those who were closest to her. The position that Jonathan held within the family was in jeopardy, and the pressure that he was under to adjust his behavior to Joni's wishes only grew stronger. Everyone was wondering, as this conflict was developing, how far Joni would go to maintain control over the ministry and her family. This was the question that everyone was thinking about. However, the involvement of Jimmy Evans, a respected family counselor who appeared to share Joni's point of view, was what made the situation even more concerning than it already was. The fact that Evans asserted that Joni's voice was on par with God's raised red flags because it put her in a position that was both extremely powerful and unchallenged. Was this advice of a spiritual nature, or was it an attempt to gain more control over the situation? Due to the fact that the very basis of their faith was being called into question, Jonathan and Susie were left with very little room for maneuvering. When it comes to a ministry that is run by a family, what exactly is the role that spiritual leaders play, and how is it that the line between authority and manipulation can become so easily lost? Jonathan and Susie experienced a sense of betrayal in the aftermath of the meeting. This feeling was not only caused by Joni, but also by the system that allowed such manipulation to take place. The accusations that they have made in public are a daring challenge to the way that the ministry has been managed, and it is difficult to ignore the truth that lies behind their statements. As they continue to express their opinions, the world is left in a state of awe. What are the consequences that arise when the spiritual foundation of a family is constructed on control rather than trust? What exactly is the price that must be paid for remaining silent in the face of manipulation? The marriage that caused disruption within the family. Her family was taken aback when the news of Joni Lamb's second marriage to Doug Weiss became public, and the consequences of that decision continue to reverberate throughout the ministry. The fact that Joni was married to Doug Weiss appeared to push Jonathan and Susie beyond the point where they could no longer handle their relationship with Joni, which was already a source of difficulty for them. The marriage of Joni was met with a great deal of controversy. As far as Jonathan and Susie are concerned, the union was not merely a matter of personal preference, rather it was regarded as a betrayal of the family's established principles and convictions. In addition to their concerns regarding Doug Weiss's divorce and previous relationships, the Lambs believed that he was an unsuitable partner. This only served to add fuel to the fire during their relationship. The decision that Joni made to marry Doug Weiss just a few months after Marcus Lamb's passing caused many members of the family and the ministry to question her reasons for making the decision. The question is whether this was a genuine relationship or whether it was an attempt to maintain control in the wake of the death of her husband. There were other people who voiced their concerns, in addition to Jonathan and Susie. Several members of the ministry community have voiced their displeasure with the timing of the marriage as well as the nature of the union. On the other hand, Joni's reaction was prompt and severe when Jonathan and Susie expressed their refusal to publicly support the union. Her demand was that they support her marriage, regardless of how they felt about it personally, and she threatened them with consequences if they did not comply with her demand. It was becoming increasingly apparent that Joni's actions were not solely concerned with her personal life as the family continued to fall apart. They posed a threat to the ministry that the family had set up, as well as the beliefs that they had labored so diligently to establish. Not only did the Lambs consider Joni's marriage to be a breach of the principles that their family upholds, but they also considered it to be an insult to the legacy that Marcus had provided for them. Not only did the Osteen family find themselves at odds with one another, but they also found themselves at odds with the very principles that had once brought them together. This was because Joni and Doug's marriage became a contentious issue. When the stakes were higher than they had ever been, the question that everyone was wondering was whether or not the Osteen family would be able to survive this. A dramatic meeting took place, during which Jonathan and Susie were compelled to confront Joni's actions head-on. This meeting was the culmination of the growing tension that existed within the family. Because Joni was so adamant about protecting her marriage and the choices she made, she refused to back down. Due to the fact that Jonathan and Susie were caught in a web of family loyalty, religious duty, and personal conviction, the pressure was extremely high. At the end of the day, their refusal to support Joni's marriage resulted in a public fallout that would alter the way their lives would proceed from that point forward. But the real question that remained was, what happens in the world of faith when personal beliefs and loyalty to one's family come into conflict with one another? The fact that Jonathan and Susie did not publicly support Joni's marriage stemmed from more than just a disagreement between them. It was a form of assertion, a statement that called into question the very basis upon which Joni's authority was built, and one that would have far-reaching implications for their relationship with her, as well as for the ministry and its operations. As the fracture in their family became public knowledge, the Lambs, who had been devoted followers of the Osteen family in the past, found themselves on the outside looking in. Is it possible that this rift could be repaired, or did it happen to be the final nail in the coffin for their participation in the ministry? The tumultuous encounter that brought about total transformation. When Jonathan, Susie, Joni Lamb, and Jimmy Evans met as a family on July 11, 2023, it would be remembered as the moment when the Osteen family's world came crashing down. This event would go down in history. Due to the fact that the Lambs were compelled to endure a heated debate regarding their refusal to publicly support Joni's marriage to Doug Weiss, the stakes were extremely high. Evans, who had been brought in as a mediator, asserted that Joni's voice was the same as God's voice, which caused the situation to quickly escalate before Evans's intervention. Jonathan and Susie were absolutely shaken to their very core by the accusation. Despite the fact that they had long held Joni in high regard, this particular moment revealed a level of control that was both unsettling and challenging to acknowledge. The psychological response of Jonathan was unmistakable. Throughout his entire life, he had held the firm belief that the voice of God should be heard directly, without the need for intermediaries. As a result of hearing that he was required to submit to Joni's interpretation of God's will, he experienced feelings of betrayal and an attempt to manipulate his spirituality. It didn't take long for the conversation to shift from a disagreement about a marriage to a deeply personal assault on their faith and their capacity to hear God's voice for themselves. What began as a disagreement within the family eventually turned into a conflict on a spiritual level, a situation in which Jonathan and Susie found themselves in a precarious position, caught between the expectations of their family and the beliefs that they hold deeply. There was a palpable sense of tension in the room. In an effort to combat the spiritual bullying, Jonathan, who has always been a staunch supporter of his convictions, confronted Evans with the question of why he was being coerced into accepting Joni's word as gospel truth. The response that he got, on the other hand, was both unsettling and conclusive. Evans and Joni asserted that their direction was divinely inspired, and they excluded any possibility of questioning or disagreeing with their assertions. There was more to it than just a disagreement over theology. The struggle for control was going on. It was communicated to Jonathan and Susie that their spiritual obligation was to submit, or else they would have to face the consequences of being perceived as defiant. This was a very clear message. What was at stake was not only their faith, but also their family and their positions in the ministry. As the discussion became more heated, Joni and Evans continued to insist that Jonathan's refusal to comply was not only a challenge to their authority, but also an affront to God himself. They said this over and over again. The allegations of spiritual abuse that had been simmering below the surface for a number of years were now brought to the forefront with full force. It wasn't just that the Lambs didn't agree with the decisions that their family made. They were accused of disobeying the divine leadership of the family, which was being held against them. Both Jonathan and Susie were able to make an informed decision. whether they choose to remain silent about their suffering or to speak up for what they believe to be right. The disagreement, however, was not your typical one. Their ministry was going to be shaken to its very core as a result of the crisis of faith that they were experiencing. Those last few minutes of the meeting were the most unsettling of the entirety. In a chilly and unruffled manner, Joni made the announcement that Jonathan and Susie would no longer be permitted to participate in the ministry if they were unable to follow her example. The public perception of the Osteen family as a stable and cohesive unit was shattered, and in its place stood a fractured and broken family that was struggling to cope with the consequences of their behavior. Both Jonathan and Susie were aware that their lives would never be the same again as they decided to leave. The shockwaves that were caused by this meeting would reverberate throughout the Osteen family, Lakewood Church, and the millions of followers who had placed their faith in their leadership. More than just a disagreement in theology, the allegations of sexual abuse and the claims of spiritual abuse made by Joni Lamb by the Lambs go significantly further. They bring to light a more profound and ominous problem that has been brewing within the Osteen family for a considerable amount of time. The allegations of sexual abuse that Jonathan made against a member of his family that have not been resolved. The situation was not merely a matter of family strife. In spite of the fact that it was a traumatic experience, the Osteen family chose to disregard and disregard it. The realization that Jonathan's daughter was being abused by a member of the family signified a significant turning point. That was the catalyst for a chain of occurrences that would irreparably damage the stability of the family unit. The reaction of Joni and Marcus Lamb was what made the situation even more heartbreaking than it already was. They immediately defended the accused family member, claiming that the allegations were without foundation, rather than supporting Jonathan and taking action. Additionally, they did not take any action. Jonathan was subjected to an unfathomable level of betrayal by this. Why would the family choose to disregard such a serious allegation? But the absence of support was not the only thing that caused pain. The realization that the family's loyalty to one another was greater than their loyalty to the truth was the catalyst for this realization. Because Joni and Marcus did not take any action, Jonathan was left with the feeling that he was abandoned and isolated. This act of betrayal would not only have an impact on their personal relationship, but it would also have repercussions that would last for a very long time for their ministry. When it was determined that the investigation into the allegations of sexual abuse was inadequate and flawed, the story took yet another dark turn. It was reported to the Lambs that the family member had been cleared of any wrongdoing. However, Jonathan and Susie were aware that something was not quite right. A hasty and insufficient investigation had been conducted, and the truth had been concealed in order to preserve the reputation of the family. A courageous act of defiance, Jonathan's decision to speak out about the abuse put him at odds with his own family and put his position within the ministry in jeopardy. Jonathan's decision to speak out was a courageous display of defiance. Jonathan knew that he could not allow the truth to be swept under the rug, despite the enormous amount of pressure that was placed on him to maintain his silence. As the public gained more information about the personal struggles that the Lambs had been going through, it became abundantly clear that the spiritual abuse that they had endured was merely the tip of the iceberg. The allegations of sexual abuse, in conjunction with the absence of accountability within the Osteen family, painted a picture of an organization that was more concerned with safeguarding its reputation than it was with ensuring the health and safety of its members. The stakes had never been higher for Jonathan and Susie than they were right now. Their unwavering dedication to truth and justice led them down a perilous path, one that would ultimately result in the loss of their jobs, their reputations, and their relationships with their close family members. These revelations had repercussions that were felt by a much wider audience than just the Osteen family. As the story of the Lambs gained more attention, questions were raised regarding the role that leaders play in religious organizations and the responsibility that they have to protect those who are vulnerable individuals. There was a long shadow cast over the ministry as a result of the allegations of spiritual and sexual abuse, and the public started to question the extent to which the Osteen family's success had been built on a foundation of secrecy and manipulation. The truth, which had been concealed for a long time, was now public knowledge, and there was no going back. As the controversy that surrounded the Osteen family continued to escalate, Jonathan found himself in a position where his future within the ministry was hanging by a thread. This was the ultimate betrayal that Jonathan committed. As a result of his refusal to comply with the demands of Joni and Doug Weiss, he faced consequences that were both personal and professional. This was the case despite the fact that he had a profound devotion to both the church and his family. Jonathan had little choice but to resign from his position as a leader at Lakewood Church after the explosive meeting with Joni and Evans. He had no other option. Not only did he lose his job, but he also lost his sense of purpose and his connection to the one and only life he had ever known. Joni, who believed that maintaining control over the ministry was significantly more important than family loyalty, made the decision to let Jonathan go from his position. This was a calculated move on her part. Jonathan, on the other hand, experienced a sense of betrayal, not only from his mother, but also from the entire system that had previously served as his support. His email to Joni, in which he requested a conversation about the circumstance, was not responded to for a number of months. Jonathan was met with silence and rejection throughout the entire process, rather than the clarity and resolution he had hoped to receive. To add salt to the wound, Joni informed him that his dismissal would not have any impact on the payroll for the time being. This created a false sense of hope, which was quickly dashed when he was officially let go from his position. The betrayal of his professional reputation by members of his own family was a blow that Jonathan had not anticipated. The dynamics of the family, which had been characterized by unity and shared faith up until that point, had been irreparably broken. Not only was Jonathan left to question his place within the family, but he was also left to investigate his position within the ministry, which had at one time felt like a calling. Even though he had spent years cultivating the legacy of the ministry, he was forced to witness its disintegration in a matter of months as a result of a string of distressing personal conflicts. Jonathan would be haunted for years to come by the emotional toll of being forced out of the very institution that he had helped to establish, and the damage that was done to his relationship with his family appeared to be irreparable. Nevertheless, Jonathan did not waver in his conviction that the truth must be revealed, even though he was experiencing a great deal of suffering. In spite of the fact that the betrayal from his mother and the fallout from their spiritual conflict were difficult to bear, Jonathan was steadfast in his decision to stand by his convictions. Truthfulness and openness were two things that he was well aware of being essential to the future of his family and his ministry. Even though he was no longer in a position of authority, he was resolute in his efforts to make sure that his point of view was taken into consideration. When the public was once enamored with the picture-perfect life that the Osteen family led, they were now beginning to see the cracks that were beneath the surface. Over the course of several months, the internal strife that existed within the Osteen family became public knowledge, and both supporters and critics of the family voiced their opinions on the conflict. A more open and honest discussion about the power struggles, spiritual abuse, and family dynamics that had plagued the Osteen legacy for years marked the end of an era, but also opened the door to the conversation. However, Jonathan's story was not even close to being finished. In spite of the fact that his own personal life was falling apart, he had guaranteed that he would keep fighting for the honor of his family. Exactly what took place behind closed doors is a mystery. During the time that Jonathan and Susie were attempting to put their lives back together, they gradually started to learn the full extent of what had been going on behind closed doors within their family. However, the public meeting with Joni and Evans had only been the beginning of the process. During the course of their investigation into the Osteen family's business practices, they came to the realization that the ministry was about more than just spreading faith. At any cost, it was about preserving control over the situation. The allegations of spiritual abuse, which had appeared to be exaggerated at one point, were slowly but surely becoming all too real. What they found was a complex web of deceit and manipulation that had been built up over the course of many years. A foundation of secrecy, control, and emotional coercion served as the platform upon which the Osteen family established their powerful position within the Christian community. Jonathan's efforts to bring the truth about the allegations of sexual abuse involving a family member had been thwarted at every turn. Those in power selected to protect the reputation of the ministry over the safety of its members, which meant that Jonathan's efforts to bring the truth to light had been thwarted. It was not solely for the purpose of defending their convictions that Jonathan and Susie made the decision to speak out. Bringing to light the shady dealings of an organization that had violated their trust was the purpose of this endeavor. There were more revelations to come after that. Jonathan and Susie started to piece together a troubling pattern of spiritual manipulation, in which decisions were made not based on scripture or biblical teaching, but rather on the desires of a select few individuals who sought to maintain power. They came to the realization that Joni's marriage to Doug Weiss, which had contributed to a great deal of upheaval, was not merely a matter of personal preference, The measure was a component of a more comprehensive plan to strengthen control over the ministry. Despite the fact that Doug's history was murky and there was no biblical justification for his divorce, Joni saw him as a way to strengthen her position of authority within the family, in spite of the fact that her own children were against it. This was the most heinous act of betrayal that Jonathan and Susie could commit. They had once placed their faith in the leadership of their family and had faith in the work that the ministry was called to do. They came to the realization that they had been subjected to manipulation for a number of years as they discovered the truth. Although the Osteen family had never fully acknowledged the emotional and spiritual abuse that they had endured, it was now indisputable that they had been subjected to such abuse. The realization that the Osteen legacy, which was once regarded as a beacon of hope and faith, had been built on lies and manipulation, added to the shock that was caused by these revelations. The revelation of these secrets to the general public would irrevocably alter the way in which people look at the Osteen family. Not only did Jonathan and Susie's courageous decision to speak out bring to light the abuse that had been taking place within their own family, but it also made it possible for other people to come forward and share their own experiences of being manipulated spiritually. The image of the Osteen ministry, which had been unassailable for a long time, started to fall apart, and the truth was once again readily available for everyone to see. The shocking revelations that have been made about the Osteen family have completely destabilized their world. Following the revelation of everything that has been brought to light, what do you believe will happen to their ministry? In the comments section below, please share your thoughts. Do not forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more content that will blow your mind if you want to stay up to date with the most recent breaking news stories. Continue to pay attention because this tale is not yet finished.